Kia ora, I'm Erin J. Doyle. Welcome to my channel. I had planned to make a video with like the best and worst reads of 2020, but when I went on my Goodreads and looked at my star ratings, I discovered that of the 25 books I read last year, I gave 3 1-star and 10 5 stars, and I thought, so obviously I need to have a look at what criteria I'm using to give those stars, or maybe I just had the best reading year ever. So, assuming that the latter is true, I thought I'd tell you about all the amazing things that I read. So, without further ado, the first 5-star read, The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. This is about a woman who is captured during the Trojan Wars when her city is destroyed, and she is given as a prize to Achilles and becomes his slave. And it's about her life in the camp where he's living as they continue to try and get into Troy. So it's a little bit about Achilles and life in the camp and the other women and how they're all dealing with having gone from kind of high ups in their city, like she's a queen, I believe, if memory serves, from that to literally sex slaves. It's an unusual perspective. It's not something that we have traditionally seen, like you always see, you know, the story of the victor, or perhaps someone who died but in a glorious fashion. You don't usually see the living victims of these sorts of things. So I appreciate the different perspective, and I just thought it was an interesting story, interesting perspective or not. Next is The Invention of Wings by Sue Monk-Kidd. This starts with a young southern girl being given her first slave for her birthday, and she is kind of horrified and decides that she's going to free Handful, the girl that she's been given, and it's the story of how that goes and the two girls growing up together and then apart. I can't go into the thing that I really loved about this story without like epic spoilers, because it goes down to like the last few pages, but I thought it was quite good. Again, we're keeping things short because we're trying not to make long videos. Right, next is To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. I quite enjoyed this. By quite enjoyed, I mean I gushed and adored. I do think one of the things that I personally really liked about it is that not only were the biologists in it not evil, as is the norm these days in many sci-fis that I have read, but the science that is described is, even though much of it is futuristic, a lot of it is also completely accurate. The characters go to a planet and they're doing surveys of the existing wildlife. I have spent time going out to a forest and surveying all the wildlife, and the methods that they use are exactly what I would do in their situation. I was so convinced by the science as it's described in this book, I assumed it was written by a scientist. It isn't. And I am thoroughly impressed by the amount of research that she put into writing this. As much as I really strongly enjoyed this, I think if you're a person who wants character arcs and plot to punch you in the face with their obviousness and to be able to apply like the Save the Cat beats at very specific intervals, this may not please you quite as much as it pleased me. But I thought it was great. Can we put it there? Is it going to fall? We can put it there. Excellent. Next up is Beloved by Toni Morrison. I read this as part of my Banned TBR, and then I did do a, I think, fairly thorough wrap up of it, so I'll link to that video. Basically, I thought it was great. I could have done without the frequent and casual references to bestiality and it being treated as a totally normal and reasonable thing that a decent person would do, but other than that, I thought this was brilliant, and that the horrific, just awful things that these characters endured as slaves was written in such a way that, yes, it made you flinch, but it didn't prevent you continuing to read it, and there was a little bit of distance in the way that it was being told, because it was always something the characters recalled from the past. It wasn't super immediate for the characters, so even though it was really nasty stuff, shiny cover, it remained very readable. Next up is a short, easy read, The Deep by Rivers Solomon. This is a story about mermaids and stuff, but it also has all these subtexts around memory and the importance of knowing where you come from and the weight of like your ancestors' suffering. I thought it was brilliant. Right, next up is Susie by Madeline Miller, which is so shiny. This is about Susie from Greek mythology. I really enjoyed this. I don't know how much of my enjoyment was built into or founded on my pre-existing knowledge of the relevant myths. But again, this was one of those stories that's telling the story you don't get to hear. Like normally you just get, oh yes, evil witch turned people into pigs, but instead you finally get to see, you know, her side of the story and her motivations and that kind of thing. There were some very sad lines in it, but sad in like a really good way. I thought it was great. Of course, otherwise I wouldn't have given it 5 stars. Next up, The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen. I assume it's pronounced Shabosky. I could be very, very wrong. This is one where it was probably like a 4 point something and then I rounded it up to 5 stars, because I wouldn't go so far as to say that this was flawless, but I really enjoyed it. Again, this was part of my Banned TBR, so check out that video for a more in-depth blah blah, I hope. Maybe I should check that video to make sure there is in-depth blah blah, but yeah, I've talked about it before. Next is Watch Us Rise by Renee Watson and Ellen Hagen. This is a YA about a group of students whose high school requires that you are in a club, and they, for various reasons, have issues with the clubs that they're in and end up breaking away and forming one of their own with the mission statement of fighting injustice and addressing some of the issues that they've had in their other clubs. I think this book would have been super impactful if I had come across it when I was a teenager, but well, it didn't exist. I think as an adult there wasn't much for me to learn from this, but there was still a lot of things in it where I was like, yes, that's really satisfying and I would have loved this if I was a teenager, and I have told people about it and recommended it to teachers and be like, read this to your, well, not read this to your students, make your students read it for themselves rather. It's really good. It addresses kind of all the basic social injustice stuff that kids at school experience, basically, in varying degrees. There were, I think, 2 sentences which I didn't particularly appreciate. One of them was just a technical thing, like yes, people do that, but technically kind of moment, so that one I could forgive. The other one, I don't think it should have happened, but it was really minor. There's a boy in the friend group who they refer to as their honorary feminist, and I don't understand why he's only honorary. There is a moment where he addresses it, but not properly. He doesn't say, don't call me an honorary feminist, just call me a feminist. He just says, oh no, just call me a person, and I didn't appreciate that. I think the message that men can be feminists should have been in there, and that was a missed opportunity. But other than that, I thought it was really great. Where are we going to fit it? Oh, we're running out of room. Fortunately, we're running out of books too, so it's okay. Next is a collection of poetry by Rachel Wiley, Nothing is Okay. The poems in here are like really gritty. These aren't kind of abstract, waffly, rhyming blah blah. These are like punch you in the face poems, and many of them are like laugh so hard you wet yourself poems. They're super entertaining, and they deal with a whole lot of stuff like the reality of being plus sized, being black, being queer. So yeah, really recommend. Some of these poems are just like, I almost have them memorized. I love them so much. Is queer how she identifies? LGBT at any rate. The last 5-star read of 2020 does come with a bit of a disclaimer. I do know the author personally, so I am biased to hell in saying I gave 5 stars to The Beat of the Pendulum by Catherine Chidgey. What I think is really interesting about this book is that it's a found novel. So what she did for a year was walk around with her phone recording the conversations that she was having or that she was overhearing, things on the radio, songs that she heard, song that she got stuck in her head, advertisements, emails, any words that she encountered in her day, and then she assembled them into a novel. There's no description, there are no speech tags, so you don't have the context in which these words arise, and you just kind of have to figure it out as you go along. So the fact that I know her means that when certain people were mentioned by name with no context, no description, no, like Ellen, her husband, it's just, oh yeah, Ellen. I just had a moment of like, oh god, is that his name? When those moments happen, for me, I know exactly who she's talking about the moment that person appears in the story. So that probably made this an easier read for me than it would otherwise have been. But I do really like an unusual narrative. I really love kind of experimental, artistic, weird ways of telling stories, unusual voices. So I think even though I'm biased and I had a bit of background knowledge to interpret what I was reading, I think I probably would have really enjoyed this anyway. So that's the last one, and I don't have room for it. Oh, maybe I do. Okay, those are my 5-star reads for 2020. Here's hoping 2021 is just as star-riddled. I was thinking I could do a version of this with the 1 stars. If you're interested in that, leave a comment below. It would be a considerably shorter video if that's of interest. Also, let me know if you've read any of these, what did you think of them? If you liked this video, give it a like so the algorithm knows to share it with other people. If you haven't subscribed, click the button, do all of the things, and I will see you next time. Bye! Words.